We are delighted to bring Mary Marantz back to the show. It's been many years. We were talking about how many years ago it was, and I don't even know. Mary, how long ago was it?
I'm gonna guess 6, somewhere in the
6
6
years ago.
range. It was
Okay.
pre-Dirt, which was my first book, and it was post Dawn Jacobson, so it's somewhere in that range.
Yes,
Yay!
yes. So you mentioned your first book was Dirt, and we are talking today about your new book, Underestimated. You are also the popular podcast host of the Mary Marantz Show. If you haven't
Mhm.
listened to Mary's podcast, find it and listen to it. Mary has an incredible story. She grew up in a trailer in rural West Virginia and was the first in her family to go to college. And she went on to Yale for law school. And she has been featured on CNN and MSN, Business Insider, Southern Living, Hallmark Home and Family, and more. And now she lives with her husband, Justin, in an 1880s fixer-upper by the sea in New Haven, Connecticut.
Mhm.
So you have experienced lots of different things in your life, Mary, and your life informs your writing.
Mhm.
So as we dig into today's topic about getting unstuck and getting past the underestimating we might do for ourselves, we will be hearing some snippets of your own journey in this, and I'm excited. I'm
Mhm.
also excited because as I've been reading this new book of yours, I have felt very understood and very heard and known. And we're going to get into some of the details of it. But let's talk first just about the concept of feeling stuck. And when you talk about
Mhm.
that, what exactly are you talking about? And why do you think midlife is a time when women feel stuck?
Yeah. Ooh. Well, let's just, set up a little bit of context for everybody who's listening and hearing this for the first time. You already did a beautiful job of that, Alex, but just a little bit more is, like you said, I did grow up in the single wide trailer in rural West Virginia. And for everybody listening, whatever stock photo you have in your head of dilapidated trailer, single wide trailer, it is that. It's basically, that's right. In Appalachia, if you want the actual visual, you can go to thebookdirt.com because the cover of Dirt is the actual trailer I grew up in. And then fast forward, I go to Yale for law school. And it's like, in one way, it's like that's kind of a surprising outcome. Like, whoa, what a turnaround. But in another very real way, it's also like, especially in this country, it's like that's an underdog trope we're familiar with. We've seen
Hmm.
that movie. We've read that
Hmm.
book. Humble Beginnings to the Ivy League. There are a lot of movies and books like that. I would think it's very safe to say that I've spent most of my life with an underdog complex. Growing up a certain way can put that on you. I think being the first in your family to break barriers can put that on you. I had a teacher and I had many, many amazing teachers in high school. Let me preface this sentence with that. But I had one teacher in high school who said to me, if anybody is going to make it out of Richwood, West Virginia, trust me, it will not be you. And it was like
Mm.
amazing. Put that in my back pocket for some jet
Mm.
fuel later on. So I have been very successful at using being the underdog. And there's this one line, there's 2 words in this book that are self-indictment that is like a punch in the face. And those 2 words are perceived slight. Perceived slight. Plenty of times I have been actually slighted. And then we also tend to use every perceived slight we can find to help fuel that beast of this machine that needs perpetual more jet fuel if we're going to keep running. And so we think about this idea of what happens to us that we end up playing small, that we end up being stuck. And on the one hand, I've known, even though I've been this underdog who's used it to achieve incredible things, like Yale Law is essentially the equivalent of Willy Wonka's golden tickets. I got a golden ticket.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I have also spent most of my life using those achievements as kind of like a stiff arm. Shiny is a stiff arm. It's a Heisman pose. It's a tricky sleight of hand. This is look over here and you won't pay attention to all the things I'm playing small on that I'm still stuck on. So I wanted to write a book since
Mm.
I was 5 years old, and Dirt came out the year I turned 40. So
Mm.
believe me, I know what it is to stay stuck. And another year goes by and the clock goes on ticking and the world is worse for your absence. And then we talk
Mm.
about midlife. I'll just say one more quick thing. In this book, Underestimated, there are 2 parallel metaphors because why have one metaphor running through the whole book when you can have 2? One of them is pushing a boulder up the mountain over and over again, only for it to roll back down. And the other is this ledge come back around. You leap to the first time, but will you leap the next time the ledge comes back around? I'm not going to spoil it, but by the end, we find out they are, in fact, one and the same. And I think that's midlife, right? Maybe we leaped when we went to the college we went to, or we left our hometown, or maybe we got married young, or maybe we waited to get married, or starting a family, or the job. We went to Paris for the internship. You're not going to Paris, right? Like whatever. And so we took that leap, and then we get mortgages, and we get marriages, and we have kids, and we have college tuitions, and we have people counting on us, and we have this good life that becomes kind of the enemy of great a little bit.
Well, and okay, so this really does get to fear. It really does get to this idea that fear maybe takes many forms in different times of our lives. And so maybe when we were younger, it took a certain form and we overcame it. But then maybe fear shows up again in a different form, in a different body, and a different way. And we wonder how we are going to push through that, or we think, no, that's too big. I can't push through that. So can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe fear is not a one-time thing to be conquered.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. So I mentioned a second ago, this whole book is sort of premised on the idea that fear is a really boring liar. For everybody who hasn't gotten a chance to hold the book in their hands yet, every chapter is a different face of fear. So we have perfectionism, procrastination, people-pleasing, imposter syndrome, overthinking, even a fear of success, 14 of them in total. And one of the very early epiphanies that I had for this book, this is really, you find this in chapter 2, Fear is a Broken Script. Before we can do any of the real work, I got to tell you about the character of fear. The epiphany moment is that fear is a really boring liar. That's kind of the one that's been going around, that as I talk about this. But it's actually a layer deeper there, which is, what if fear attacks creatives in particular, not like painters, but like people who are putting good things into the world? What if fear attacks creatives in particular because it is jealous that it itself is not creative at all, right? And so I say there that, fear is not tethered to muse or melody or the original force of all creation. And in fact, if we just hang out there for a second, I keep waiting for this. I've said this on a few podcasts, and I feel like maybe this will be the show where it really lands. If we think about fear as being a liar, so being the father of lies, being the enemy of the good work we were put here to do, then it only makes sense that its attributes would be the opposite of the creative force that prepared that work for us in advance. So if we are made in the image of a creator and we ourselves are creative, then the opposite, the enemy of that, is not going to be creative at all. So it's going to be untethered from that force of creation. So it does have two gifts, though. One is the ability to throw its voice so it can sound like you, because if it sounded like Morgan Freeman, you could catch it every time. And the other is what you were talking about, Krista, and that's the ability to shapeshift, to be a really slippery enemy. And we confuse slippery and persistent with creative, because really when you boil it down, he's just got the same 14, 15, 20 scripts he uses on all of us. It's all been done. It's all been done better. It's all been done by somebody the world actually cares about, and so on. When you get him under control coming in the front door as perfectionism, he's going to slip in the side door as overthinking or imposter syndrome, or what if I do suddenly get a lot of eyes on this and I have that fear of success? Because wait a minute, people are going to actually listen to this episode. They're going to actually read this book. Like, just kidding. Just kidding. And that's our drop the boulder moment, and it all rolls back down the mountain. So 100%. And gosh, when you were describing that of like, you get one in this phase of life and one later, that sounds, in one way, it sounds wonderful, because I feel like I get hit by all 14 of these on a daily basis. Like I just sort of spin the wheel daily. Somebody joked the other day, like they were like, oh, like which one chapter should they go read first? And I was like, well, first of all, I'm so jealous if they only need one of these chapters, because I need them all. And so I do think like fear is just going to kind of rotate. Oh, I'm going to tell you your voice doesn't matter. And I'm going to tell you, especially if you have the gift of words, it's going to attack you at that crosshair intersection where your gifts meet your story. So your voice doesn't matter and your story disqualifies you. You have the gift of helping people. It's selfish for you to start. You've always been this selfish person. Your story has always shown you to be the selfish person who doesn't deserve this work. Yeah, I think 100%. For some people, it rotates in big seasons. For me, it's like Wheel of Fortune, baby. Which one's going to show up today?
That's so good. And regardless of how it shows up, the end result is the same, and that is you're sidelined.
Right.
And that, to me, like that visual of us being sidelined, that is so
powerful and discouraging to me because we all have it. We all have those things in our heads that tell us, no, you can't do that, or you are disqualified. Because I cannot tell you the number of conversations I've had recently around people who are midlife to older who basically say their age disqualifies them,
Yeah.
that they no longer are relevant. They don't feel relevant, especially I think in the social media world. I read some meme once that said something like, it's the first time in history where instead of the younger people trying to be like the older people are trying to be like the younger people because
Mm,
of Instagram and
wow.
TikTok.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, that is interesting. But I hear that because people are feeling they're in that second half of life,
Mhm.
they no longer feel relevant. In some ways, it's the greatest tragedy to me because at a time in life where they are the most valuable because
Mm,
of their experience and everything they've been through, and because of the life lived, they actually feel sidelined.
right.
And so, Mary, when we are in that moment where we're feeling irrelevant, where we are feeling this sense of, well, because this happened, because my child was wayward, because I ended up making this decision, because maybe I got a divorce, because I'm now 58 or 60. What do we do in those moments where we feel like I am disqualified from
Mm,
doing what God is calling me to do in this
yeah.
next season?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to do is meet that question with empathy because we've all had thoughts like that. That goes to like, it's all been done. It's all been done better. It's all been done by somebody the world actually wants to pay attention to, right? It's that third one in particular. Like we apparently want to live and breathe the TikTok stars right now. I'm not on TikTok, so I don't know any of the
I'm
things
not
that are
either. I'm
happening
not
over there.
either.
Anyway, but I want to meet that with empathy because I think all of us will have that thought zip through our heads. The second thing that I think helps is so much of this, like when we talk about that action verb of naming the fear, is so many times when you just say it out loud, you can hear it with your own ears of what you're saying. You see how, ridiculous that premise would actually be. It loses all its power. So imagine your surgeon walked into the room to prep you for your heart surgery and he or she said to you, gosh, I've been doing this for 25 years. I'm the top of my field. I have all this wisdom and all this experience, but I just feel like these interns over here are so much cooler. Like, do you want them to do the surgery instead? You'd be like, what are you talking about? And so that kind of leads me into there's a part in Underestimated where I talk about overnight is overrated.
Mm.
And I don't know when the height of success became how little time we've been at this work. And I don't know about you guys, but I never want somebody to say the most interesting thing about Mary is how easy all this came to her. It's how little time she's been doing this, how few reps she's put into her craft. Let's
Mhm.
learn from her. I would be
Mhm.
mortified to show up if y'all introduced me that way.
Mhm.
But we feel like it doesn't count unless it happens overnight. And I actually write in that book a few ways I actually think when overnight success happens. And I've been around long enough in my previous industry of photography and, even in the author world now, being around 6 years, to see it happen where the people who just sort of exploded overnight, not the people where it seemed like that's what happened, but there were actually 10 years of work that led up to it. But I mean, truly just like blew up overnight. Is that I have a working unscientific scientific theory that there's like a radioactive half-life that however long it takes them to blow up and go really big is about how long it takes for them to crash and burn as well. When we see somebody get true overnight success where it's just like a windfall and they're like Elwood style, what? Like it's hard. Um,
I did like that you quoted Elle Woods in there
Yeah.
in the book. Yeah.
I'm going to tell you something so everybody listening can just go ahead and pray on this is I actually got to see Reese Witherspoon in person a couple weeks ago
Mm.
and I left a book for her and I left a little heart beside the Elwoods thing and we just all want her to open that book up and turn to that page. Page 1 in the book. What I'm saying here is that when overnight success really happens, a couple of things happen. One, the people who have that happen to them, it goes right to their head. They think
Mhm.
it's like a windfall moment. It goes right to their head. They think, oh, it's all about me because it must be my combination of characters that made this work so well. Whereas slow growth, which is the name of my second book, Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots, the work has time to work on you. The humility gets baked in. Number two, if you get this overnight success and it's just super easy and you think that's how it's always going to be, then the first time it gets hard, you want to turn tail and quit because you don't have that kind of resilience built up.
Mhm.
And number 3, you don't know when into growing a thing. So you can become very wasteful with the fruit of it. I say you want to see fruit rot on the vine or turn into scorched earth, give it to somebody who only showed up for the harvest. So what I'm saying to everybody listening is if
Mm.
you are midlife, 45, 50, 55 and beyond, whatever age you are, what a foundation of experience and grit and putting in the reps and muscle memory and wisdom you have to offer. And none of it is wasted. I went to law school to become a wedding photographer. I built my photography business to the height of my industry just to Ross
Mhm.
Geller style pivot again and become an author. And I carry all of it with me. None of it is wasted. So,
Mhm.
and then I just got one more thing to say to this because I'm apparently very passionate about it. So it's not wasted. There's still time. Do it. But here's the flip side of this. Oliver Wendell Holmes has a quote that says, most people will go to their graves with the music still inside them unplayed.
Ooh.
And so let the urgency, let the fear of forfeiting the opportunity, let the realization that the
Mm.
world is worse for your absence. Don't live in regret, but let's live with a little bit of urgency. But the
Mhm.
clock is ticking. Yeah.
Yeah. Urgency is interesting, I think, in this phase of life because we
Mm,
are facing our mortality in a new way. Just
yeah.
we feel older, but also for many of us, our parents are dying and we're seeing the end of a life that maybe was of people that we thought would live forever. We just didn't think
Yeah.
about. So mortality is such a force and it creates this sense of urgency, but then I think it can also be paralyzing to
Hmm.
think, oh, dang, but now I have this pressure to
Hmm.
decide what it is I'm going to do, what it is I'm going to
Yeah.
spend my life doing. And for some people, it may be really clear, and that's an, a great sense of urgency to get the things done. But I think for others, it can feel overwhelming and
Mm,
paralyzing.
yeah. Yeah. What that brings up for me is the procrastination chapter.
Yes.
Procrastination's a big one for me. That's chapter 8. Procrastination is a double-edged sword. And that whole chapter kicks off with a story of me turning in a paper in college that had to be, the rule was it had to be turned in class. And I turned it in with 23 seconds left and then get 100 on the paper. And I've been like chasing that high every day of my life ever since, you know? And so there's this part, what you were just saying there about how urgency can actually like be paralyzing. It kind of reminds me of what I talk about in that chapter. And I also, this is discussed by James Clear when he talks about the action line. I quote him in that chapter. I call this feeling the terror. The terror is the moment when you've like dreaded it and you've worried about it and you've catastrophized it and, like existential angsted it. And now you are approaching this Armageddon threshold moment. If we set the bomb off past this point, Earth still gets destroyed, right? Which is like our line in the sand of if we don't get moving, we might actually fail this time. And for me, I've actually learned to make friends with the terror. And I talk about it being kind of this like in a fight fire with fire, I'm rubber, you're glue sort of way. Ironically, the only way for me to get out of procrastinating on the dream is to feel the urgency that I might lose the opportunity. And I might actually fail this time. And then as I say, like vampire venom in a wildly popular YA novel, suddenly
Yeah.
it shoots through my veins with crystallizing clarity. And the words just pour forth like they were always there. So in this really weird, bizarre way, pushing ourselves up to that kind of a deadline, using procrastination up until the last minute. For some of us, my hand raised 100%. It's the only way we can break free of the perfectionism that keeps us stuck, if only temporarily. And then the perfectionism returns the second the deadline is gone. So that's all I can kind of think to stay there. I would love to hear more about the urgency freezing people because to me the urgency is what has set me free from papers in college to oh boy I have a deadline on this book I'm writing. I didn't write any books from 5 to 40. I've written 3 in 5 years because I have a deadline. So I don't know,
Mm.
Alex, tell me more about that.
I think I hear and probably I feel sometimes too the pressure of, okay, this is my one shot.
Mhm.
And so, what is that one shot going to look like? Where am I going to put all of my energy and power
Yeah.
and value? And especially if I have not been able to decide up to a certain point, it feels like
Yeah.
that fight, flight, or freeze. I'm going to
Yeah.
freeze instead of fight through it. And so it may be a
Mhm.
personality indicator. I don't know, as
Yeah.
far as how people respond to pressure, though I am a procrastinator because I do need that deadline and I need
Yeah.
an external deadline. Like self-imposed deadlines do not work for me. I need someone
Yeah.
else to be responding or waiting for me.
Yeah.
But I just think that sometimes the procrastination is the fear of the decision.
Yeah. Okay, so that brought up an answer for me. That was very helpful. So I'm doing an underestimated season on my podcast, The Mary Marantz Show, and the episode that just came out was Chris Gillibo, and he has a brand new book that just released April 15th called Time Anxiety.
Hmm.
And I asked him in the episode, like, okay, so you talk about existential time, which is my life is running out. And then you
Hmm.
talk about day-to-day time, which is I don't have enough time in the day to do all the things I want to do. And I said, which is it? Like, which one do we get right with first that makes the other one easier to get right with? Is it the big vision that makes the day to day easier or the day to day that makes the big vision easier? I said, vision or discipline, chicken or the egg, which comes first?
Hmm.
And what he said was very interesting. He said, for some people, it is big vision and it trickles down. But for a lot of us, it is showing up every day and saying, okay, I have these abilities. I have these gifts that I've, begun to recognize or other people have begun to call out in me. What does it look like for me to show up and do things that feel like I'm using those gifts, like it's helping people and like it's life-giving, and then see what it accumulates to? Like rather than having the like, what is my purpose?
Hmm.
Existential dread, like what if you just show up every day and do work that feels like it matters? And so that reminds me of something wrote in Slow Growth, which is the use of my gifts, the use of my story in service to others for your ultimate glory every day of my life. That's it. And it's like when you simplify it to that kind of, that's the filter. That's
Hmm.
the filter. What do I do every day? To use my gifts, to use my story in service to others for your ultimate glory for the rest of my life. That's it.
Hmm.
And then what results is a sort of a cumulative purpose. So that's a way of looking at it.
Hmm.
Well, and I think it's interesting that you say that, Mary, because then that calms the fear because you're just showing up to
Yeah.
the day ahead.
Yep.
Like for some, they want that, bigger vision and that actually motivates them. But for those that aren't wired that way,
Mm.
maybe feels more manageable and it actually lowers that fear factor
Yeah.
because they're just showing up for the day and
Yes.
that feels more manageable.
100%. And that reminds me of something that I talk about in the book. I actually heard the first time from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So
Okay. Yeah.
and he was talking about the difference between goals and intentions. And it basically was saying if you set goals, then you get to celebrate on one day when the goal comes true, right? When the headline days, and you have like how a regular, normal human, even an overachieving human has maybe like what, 50 of those, you
Mhm.
know? 100, I don't know, 25, I have no idea, but not very many when you talk about how many days you actually have in your life. So you get to celebrate on those days and nothing else. Whereas if you set intentions where every day you're waking up and you're saying, who do I have to be today to one day become the person who stands in the shoes of that goal, then every day you do that is a day for celebrating. And I think that's really what we're talking about here. It's like, and
Mhm.
that's the whole backbone of this book is that we become a person who quits playing small, not by swinging for the fences and going big, but by very small shifts every day, because it becomes a becoming. It becomes an identity thing, not a thing that happened to us.
Yeah, which now we're back to James Clear. We're back
Yeah.
to how do
Right.
you actually become 1% better every day? Like that's
Yeah.
his big thing.
Right.
Become 1% better every day. And how do you build a habit? You do it by becoming that. You make
Mhm.
small shifts that are transformational change over a long period of time so that you're becoming that. And instead
Yeah.
of like, I want to be a runner. Okay, I am a runner. You
Mhm.
adopt that identity and then that 1%. It feels so manageable and it
Mhm.
feels like, okay, we can do that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, in a full circle moment, I'll just throw this out there one more time. This is why overnight doesn't work, because you didn't have
Mhm.
time to become the thing,
Hmm.
Mhm.
right? Like it happened to you. It was a windfall moment. You are not somebody who stewards things well. You are not a leader. You are not somebody who runs a business with integrity. You had one thing good happen to you once. So like, this is why it crumbles when any kind of pressure gets put on it at all. You know?
Hmm. Yeah. Can we talk about perfectionism?
Yes, we
Because I think
can.
this is one that probably many of our listeners can relate to.
Mhm.
And I want to read something from the book. You said, Perfectionism has convinced you for years that perfect can somehow keep you safe, meaning that until that elusive someday when you are finally perfect, the only alternative is to stay hidden a little while longer.
Hmm. Yeah, let's just let that hang there for a second. The
Mm-hmm.
air. It's so funny because so this is chapter 10, perfectionism is hiding with better PR. And something that you'll sort of anybody who reads one of my books will quickly discover is like there's the thing, and then there's like the thing beneath the thing beneath the thing beneath the thing. Like it's like 7 layers of things. That chapter feels like it's a really tongue-in-cheek funny play. Like there's a part where I say, not since the got milk people has there been an ad campaign to make something so plain Jane vanilla seem so sexy and sought after as when Hiding hired the same marketing team that Cauliflower did when it told everyone it was pizza and did a rebrand and a glow up as perfectionism. Like that's something we're happy to tell people we are. I'm just such a perfectionist. We're not happy to say I'm hiding in plain sight because I'm afraid I'm going to get my heart broken.
Mm-hmm.
But what we quickly find is that that's a really deep dive chapter that begins by talking about how different, parts of my story, growing up in Appalachia, growing up in the 80s, being an Enneagram 4, a self-preserving Enneagram 4 wing 3, they make me a very stoic personality where I don't want your help. I don't want you feeling sorry
Mhm.
for me. I don't want your advice unless I specifically ask you for it. It feels like condescension. It runs in my ears, runs down my throat, burns down my throat, and tastes like condescension. And it says that section ends with like saying like, it turns out acting like you don't need people is a great way not to have any. So that's where it starts. And then it comes full circle at the end talking about I used perfect as a weapon when my mom left when I was 9. I was going to set out to build a life so beautiful and exceptional on the outside that it would make somebody sad that they weren't there to see it. What I kind of talk about there at the end is like, it's one thing when somebody else abandons us and we're trying to prove them wrong. It's another thing when we abandon ourselves in 1,000 different ways, thinking we have to become 1,000 different future versions of ourselves before we can even begin. So
Hmm.
perfectionism is the chapter I struggle with the most. It's the fear face I struggle with the most, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Mary, can you talk about how owning your own story rather than maybe trying to just highlight certain parts of your story and not others, like how has that journey, because I mean, I know through your writing that has probably helped, I would
Mhm.
imagine,
Yeah.
of owning your own story, but how has that helped you to overcome fear and to lean in to purpose?
Mhm. So I used to go to these big photography conferences as a speaker with my husband, Justin. I went to Yale for law school to become a wedding photographer. He went to the #1 photography program, advertising photography program, which at the time, wedding photography was like a pariah, like you're going to do what? Both
Yeah.
on both sides. Like
Uh-huh.
advertising photographers were like, you're going to do what? And so we didn't just set out to have a business, we were going to have the business. We were going to prove everybody wrong. It had to be amazing if we were going to do this wild, unexpected thing. We quickly started the business, but we very quickly moved into being speakers, is my point. And we would speak in these very, very big rooms, and we would talk about our, multi 6-figure business and our 10,000 plus dollar packages and our shoots in Venice and our workshops in Australia, whatever. And we were giving phenomenal information that was transformative for people's businesses, but there was always kind of this disconnect.
Hmm.
And the very first time I stood on a stage and put up that picture of the trailer, long before it was ever very public knowledge, as the cover of a book, there was a line out the door and down the hallway that took 3 hours to get through of people wanting to come up and say, oh my gosh, me too. I was the girl in the
Mhm.
trailer. I didn't know there were people in our industry who could be up on a stage like that and come from a place like I did. And so my point is, a lot of this book is about, the small steps and the small shifts and the becoming and the looking at the track record, look at the evidence to the contrary, putting in our reps, like paying attention to like what is actually working and becoming. And so having that experience and then having it again and again and again, it undid the lie in me that said your story will disqualify you and people will turn away from you if they knew, because it was actually the opposite, that vulnerability actually drew people closer, that perfectionism was that stiff arm we talked about earlier. And so the first time was great. Like that was a really big swing of like
Mhm.
a flood of evidence to the contrary, but then I did it again and I did it again. And it was like, right, like people think we have to be perfect for people to
Mm.
want us. But the truth is, we never asked you to be perfect. We asked you to show up. That has really freed me up to go, it's all out there now, like in long
Mhm.
form, 70,000 plus words in dirt. Like my whole story's out there and the world didn't crumble. I wasn't canceled or whatever. And so, man, is it freeing. Man, is it freeing. When we were photographers, we would do pretty much all black and white images, all dark and moody. I wrote dirt. I put that story out there and it was like, I could not get enough color. It was like rainbow bright and little girl
Ooh.
Mary 1980s Mary were like finally set free. And I had like rainbow sweaters, rainbow planners, and like color, color, color. And if you want to just put it in psychology terms, I feel much more integrated. I feel like I can
Mhm.
show up as little Mary and grown up Mary in the same room.
Mhm.
It's interesting. I do leadership coaching and I work in these executive spaces.
Mm,
And I'm reading a book right now called Be the Unicorn. And one of
Mhm.
the things that he talks about in there is that this same concept that actually the more authentic we are, that is what people want. They
mhm,
want authenticity. And the reason I bring up the executive coaching is because I think the higher you get in a position, now, whether you're in a boardroom or, like you said, you're on a photography stage or whatever it is in your sector, even spiritual directors, the higher you get,
mm,
the more we think we have to hide
yeah.
and not share because we have to be put together.
Mhm,
But actually, research says differently that the more authentic we are, the more trust is built in
mm,
any arena that you're in.
yeah.
And that is actually how, leadership is trust at the end of the day.
Yes.
And relationships are just trust at the end of the day. It really is a flip in our minds that we have to flip and really believe the research and believe that actually that is the path to freedom,
Yeah.
that we will find freedom in that. And so can you talk a little bit about that, about how that freed up your soul
Mhm,
to exist differently in the world?
yeah. Well, the first thing that's coming to mind for me is I am a massive introvert. Like, I could spend most days just hanging out in my house with my dogs and my husband. I'm good.
Mhm.
I'm really good. Like, solitude is wonderful for me. I have a very rich
Mhm.
interior world and I like me. So, but here's the thing, like for many years, I thought that the extreme amount of introversion that I have, especially in the form of capacity, was going to always be a limitation for me. And I came up in that photography industry I mentioned, and there were people who were leading that put on like a very rock star sort of persona. And they would very publicly say, like, I'm one way at home, but when I walk on the stage, I'm like, they would call it like their Sasha Fierce sort of version of themselves.
Mm.
And I remember always thinking like, "Oh, that's such a flaw in me that I don't like." It takes all of my energy just to show up as the real me. I can't imagine having like multiple
Right.
personas to try to manage. And I thought that was gonna be such a weakness and it was gonna hold me back. But what I really started to see and come into and own, I would say starting in my 30s and especially now is at almost 45, is like that thing that's a weakness that I can boast of is actually such a strength because it never gave me really I talked about like the things we would talk about in that for speaking from the stage, but I've never really shown up as anything but Mary simply because I don't even have the energy. I don't even know
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
how to put on that performance. And so I hear over and over like, wow, you write like you speak like you write, you are in
Mhm.
person who you are on the internet. And so it has actually played out to that this limitation has become one of the greatest sources of my leadership strength
Mhm.
in the form of trust because you get what you get
Mhm.
with me.
Mhm.
So and it is just very freeing. And there's that whole what's coming to mind is that whole idea of like when you tell the truth, you don't have to remember, like
Mhm.
when you lie, you have
Mhm.
to remember what you said.
Yes.
But when you are
Mhm.
just showing up as you all the time, you don't have to remember. And so you get to clear
Mhm.
all of that
Mhm.
RAM in your brain because the stories will always have integrity to them, meaning
Mhm.
integer, meaning whole. And you can just use all of that energy you would have put on being a different person that you think people want to do work that matters. So I think it's been very
Mhm.
freeing.
Hmm. Yeah, I can very much relate to that capacity element of I can't put on more
Yeah.
than who I
Yeah.
already am. I don't have the capacity for that.
Yeah, and you know what I'm seeing? This is the flip side of that we should maybe be a little bit alarmed about is we live in such a filtered, curated, edited world that I'm seeing people terrified to show up in long form, even like 15-minute long form being the real them. Like, if they
Mm.
can't control all the variables, then
Mhm.
they just won't show up. So, like, I've launched 3 books now, and it has been a dramatic drop off in this for launching this book. The number of people who are like, "Oh my gosh, come on my show. Let me do an email for you. Let me do like a post for you." But like an Instagram live, I don't want to do because it's unedited and it's unfiltered and like I can't put on a filter or whatever. That has been really surprising to me that people are just like, if I can't control everything, then I don't want to show
Mhm.
up at all. And I feel like we're seeing that spike in the social
Mm.
media world we're living in.
Ooh, I mean, it literally gets to fear. It gets
Yeah.
to the book.
Yeah.
It gets to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're like, I could speak to that actually. If you let me, just give me a couple minutes and I'll talk to you about that. Well, Mary, as we are closing today, this imposter syndrome, it is just a whole thing. Like people are just talking about it all over the place.
Yeah.
Give us some words on that. As people are feeling that, feeling like I'm in this position, I don't know if I can do it. And I'm hearing this. I mean, I coach people. And so they tell me their real thoughts. And I'm hearing this over and over and over that people are actually in positions they don't feel qualified for.
Yeah.
And so, how do you help people in that?
hmm So 7 things came to my mind all at once. I'm going to try to make them make sense. Okay. Ooh, this is how Mary's brain works. Here we go. Okay. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is that it sounds to me like the people you're coaching are actually using imposter syndrome in the original way it was intended, which is that I don't feel qualified to stand in this space. Imposter syndrome, I think, has become one of those words that has been used over and over so much it starts to lose a little bit of its meaning, or the meaning becomes fluid. To the point that I even just started asking my coaching clients, like, well, what do you actually mean by that when you say
Mhm.
imposter syndrome? And so in that chapter, the first half of it is talking about it as it was originally intended, just like you described there, Krista. But then the second half, I talk about this sort of second variation that has become pretty, like, regardless of how they say it, it kind of falls under the umbrella of, I'm afraid all of this will have been a waste of time.
Mm.
That they think there's something about them or the way that they show up or how they're going to mess it up or how they can't be trusted with it. So it's sort of like a flip side of the coin. The first people like myself use it to become wildly successful. I am terrified of being found out that I'm not qualified, so I will over prepare, I will do the work, I will use that fear of failure to push me into success. The other side of the coin says, if I even got that level of success, I would mess it up anyway, or I wouldn't know what to do with it. Or I don't know. I feel like I'm going to try and I'm going to work at it, and then it's just going to be a waste of time. And then I'm going to have this guilt that I wasted time and money and energy on it. And so they stay frozen. Imposter syndrome is actually a phrase that was originally coined by 2 women psychologists named Clance and Imes, who released a study where they called it the imposter phenomenon in high achieving women. So they focused on women in particular, high achieving women, even more particular than that. And I love that they called it phenomenon. I joke in the book, like, that makes me feel so much less alone. Like, syndrome makes me feel like I'm the lone patient zero,
Mhm.
with general malaise and hysteria, like struggling with it, not seen since the turn of the century or whatever. Phenomenon feels like we are all in this. We all experience this, much like the point of the book, that we all experience fear in these very predictable ways. And it's like the second I can get you to just be so bored with fear, so bored with how imposter syndrome in particular shows up, so bored with the own excuses you hear coming out of your mouth, like, oh, even you are tired of hearing yourself say this excuse.
Mhm.
I think that's where it starts to break free. Like in slow growth, it was like getting to that point of at last exhausted, where you've tried to achieve your way into worth and no amount of gold stars made you stop feeling less than. And you finally go, okay, maybe nothing's going to work. Like I got into Yale for law school and I still feel like a loser. Like if that's not
Mhm.
going to work, what is? And so then you can finally break free from it. I think with fear, it's like, I need you to finally get so bored with it. We've seen this movie. We've watched this season. It doesn't get any better. The storylines are so predictable. The writers are phoning it in. And then you can be like, gosh, maybe I should try a different script then. So anyway, back to imposter syndrome. One of the things we can take a lot of comfort in is it's right there in the title. And Dr. Margie Worrell points this out. She says, if we are feeling imposter syndrome, we can trust we have not settled into the ranks of mediocrity, right? We
Mm.
are going after big things. Imposter syndrome is not going to tell you you're not going to be any good at binge watching that entire season on Netflix. Better not even try. It's only going to tell you not to try and that you're not qualified and that it's this fear of being found out
Mhm.
if you're doing work that matters. And so as a quick backstep, chapter 5 in the book is not enough as a blank space. And I say, if not enough, this feeling of having missing pieces or fatal flaws is the thing that tells us we're disqualified or we're going to mess it up. Imposter syndrome is the fear that soon everyone else will realize it as well.
Right.
And so, like we've been saying this whole episode, the way we battle that back is through these small shifts, these small moments of becoming and intentions and identity, where we're showing up and we're building a track record to go, look, we are doing the thing. We are people who can do this. And Clance and I specifically in that chapter say it cannot be evidence of things we're accomplishing. It can't be gold stars we got or accolades we racked up or trophies they handed out for participating. We cannot perform our way out of imposter syndrome, or that would have worked already, right? Well, that would have worked already in the many, many successes we've already accomplished. We use imposter syndrome as this like magical ritual of I have to believe I'll fail, because then that fear of failing like actually is what makes me succeed. And so they say we have to look at evidence that is not about things we've accomplished or good things that are sort of happening to us, but instead it's like, look at how I prepared for that with integrity. Look how I created that with originality. Look how I gave credit where credit was due. Look how I stewarded those finances well. Look how I showed up and gave myself 5 minutes of time of margin to be there early. I am becoming a person who can stand inside these goals with integrity. And that is what breaks the ritual.
Mm. Yeah, as I listen to you talk, it's like we put on this vest. It somehow protects us in a weird way
Yeah.
because hope is vulnerable. That has been maybe a truth that I've really been leaning
Yeah.
into this year of just calling out, like, what is so vulnerable about hoping?
Yeah.
And yet it is vulnerable to hope that we are enough for this position or
Yeah.
that this will work or whatever it is. And we
Mhm.
don't feel worthy of it. And
Yeah.
man, that gets to some deep places when we really get underneath that.
Yeah. Can I actually read like a paragraph from the book that
Please.
reminds me of? Okay. This is actually from chapter 1, which we have up on website namethefear.com. You can grab the whole first chapter and read for free. And I'm saying that both because I want people to know that, but also because I know my publisher would not be mad at me for reading from the book. Okay, here we go. All right. So why then does it feel like we are the ones always left holding the boulder when it all comes crashing down? That's because in our most honest moments, when it's just us and the darkness settled in, we know we have made an external enemy of anyone who would ever doubt us because it's easier than having to deal with what's on the inside. If you think we're mad at other people for underestimating us, you should see how much we hate ourselves. What's on the inside? At this, I picture Pandora's box. Inside is a glass menagerie of all our most fragile doubts, our most shattered self sabotaging, the sharpest shards of all our second guessing, perfectionism, overthinking, over apologizing, and generally taking ourselves out of the race before it has even begun. They are all stuffed down and hidden, temporarily kept captive even in this gold music box we keep proudly displayed on the mantle and take down at least once a day to spit polish until it shines. We've been told that it's one of those music boxes with a tiny ballerina inside her feet, grotesquely fused directly into the metal spring meant to keep her forever spinning out. It's in there now to remind us how we must always be on our toes and how if we ever let anything drop, including the act, we will just cease to exist altogether. But we don't dare ever look inside to confirm this because once you lift that lid, there's no going back. Here's what they don't tell you about Pandora's box. We know it is the latch that was lifted and let a swarm of evils loose on the world. But did you know that at the very last second, when it was all but too late, the box was slammed shut, leaving only one thing remaining inside? Hope. Philosophers have argued for years about whether that silver lining of hope was intended as a divine gift, a lifeline, a spark that can see us through the darkest of nights in a world with so much trouble, or whether that kind of hope, the hope that says you will always get everything you ever wanted if you will only just keep pushing harder, was intended as a curse itself, offering the illusion of comfort while keeping us in perpetual longing, and when our dreams once again shatter, plunging us back into despair.
Mm.
So, yeah, hope's dangerous.
Mm.
Hope's real dangerous, especially depending on what you're putting your hope in.
Ooh, Mary. And I told you this at the beginning, and I'm going to say it so our listeners can hear, but your writing is just, it's next level.
Thank
We
you.
get so many books, we read so much, and your writing is truly unique. And
What hasn't
it
anything before? I
is.
love that.
It's true. It's truly unique. It really is. The way you weave words, you're a word, and Alex, she has that gift as well. And she's written many books, but you are both, you're word weavers
Mm,
and crafters in a way that is unique
mhm.
and different than most people. So I just appreciate it so much.
You're gonna have to send me a book, Alex. I want to read the word
Okay.
weaving.
Okay. Yeah, I will.
Mary, thank you. Thank you for
Thank,
this message.
Mhm.
Thank you for continuing to put out your words in the world. They are a true gift.
thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for letting me come on and hang out with you guys. And I wish we could do it all day.
Yeah.